What we're going to be going over here is cost volume profit analysis, where we're going to be looking at the sales of multiple products in terms of grouping these products together here as a bundle group to determine the operating income here. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at here for this analysis here, we're going to be working off our operating income equation here, but what we have to start with here is the quantity sold here between those multiple products, or grouping those products together here in terms of bundles. So the first thing you have to do when you're dealing with these bundle groups here, or these sales of multiple products here, where you have to determine the sales ratio, or what they would refer to as the sales mix. So what we mean by the sales ratio here is, let's just go through it here. For example, we're going to only be looking at two different products here, product A and product B, that we're going to be grouping together here. But you could have any number of products that you'd be looking at in terms of a group or a bundle here, A, B, C, whatever, but you'd have to determine the sales ratio between each of those products. So just looking at our two products here, A and B. Well, we're budgeted to sell here 30,000 of A and 10,000 of B. So what would be our sales ratio? Well, you can look intuitively here, you can just look at it and say, well, 10,000 of B goes into 30,000 of A here, or 3 times, or that would be, we'd be selling in our bundle group here, that would include 3A here, 3 items here of A, and, well, 10,000 goes into itself once, so you'd have 1 of B. So our sales ratio here is 3 to 1. That is, we sell 3 of item A here for every 1 of item B. But our total sales here will be 40,000 items here between A and B. But in terms of bundles here, well, you can see that's going to be 10,000 bundles. Simply the fact that the 3 to 1 ratio here, or 3 plus 1 is 4 in a group here, A and B would be 4 in a group, divided into 40,000 here, that's going to give you 10,000 bundles. So really we're going to be going through this problem here in terms of bundles. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do here is look at our operating income equation here. And now that we know that sales ratio here, now we can determine our contribution margin here on a per unit basis. And we're also going to look at starting here with our operating income at a break-even point here. So going to our problem here, we're going to have product A here and product B. Remember, one bundle here includes 3 of product A here and 1 of product B. So this is where we're going to set up this equation here, and I'm going to show here in for our quantity sold here for product A, I'm just showing 3Q here. All that's referring to is that sales ratio here of 3. And for product B, I'm just showing 1Q here. Really what we want to do is we want to solve for Q here in our equation, and then we're going to be able to determine the number of bundles here at the break-even point. Okay, so let's start here. Okay, so for our operating income equation, that's our selling price. We'll start with our selling price minus a variable cost. That's the contribution margin. So starting with product A here, selling price is going to be $2 per item. Variable cost is going to be $1.40 per item here. So that is going to $2 minus the $1.40 of selling price minus variable cost is going to give us a contribution margin on a per unit basis here of 60 cents here for product A. Now we're going to be selling 3. Our sales ratio is 3 here. So if we're going to into our equation here for product A, we'll just put 3Q in here. Now moving to product B here. Well, our selling price is going to be $3 per unit here, and variable cost is going to be $1.80. So the difference is going to give us a contribution margin here of $1.20. That's for product B. Then whatever quantity we're going to have here, we have to subtract out our fixed cost here. For our example, our fixed cost is going to be $12,000. That's going to, and then setting that equation here equal to 0, that's going to give us our break-even point. So just solving for Q here. Well, let's see, we got $3 here is going to be our total contribution margin here. So how do we get that? That was simply taking 3Q here times 60 cents here for product A, contribution margin, $1.20 here times 1Q for product B, the contribution margin, adding $1.80 here plus $1.20 gives us $3 here. And take that time, solving for Q here, $3 times our quantity here will equal moving our 12,000, our fixed cost, over to the other side of the equation. We can easily determine Q here is going to be $3 into 12,000 here. Q is equal to 4,000 here. So that's going to be that's going to happen to be turn out the number of bundles that we have to sell. Now remember, Q here to 4,000, that's for item B here. That's the sales ratio here for item B, 4,000. So 3Q here would be 3 times the 4,000 is 12,000 here for item A. So that's what we're going to be selling here to have our break-even point here at our break-even point. Okay, so we could have gone through this equation with just used our regular equation here where break-even point is simply taking your fixed cost, in this case it was the $12,000 here, and divide it by the contribution margin on a per bundle basis, on our bundle basis here. That was the $3, or 3 items of product A here times 60 cents contribution margin plus 1 here of B times $1.20. That gave us our contribution here of $3. Just going over it again here. Dividing our contribution margin on our for the bundle here into the fixed cost of 12,000 gives us 4,000 bundles. Okay, so we can go through it either way here. Okay, so what does this 4,000 bundles really mean here? So that is the case here where 4,000 bundles included 3 of item A here times 3 times 4,000 gives us 12,000 here for item A. That's where we got our 3Q here. And then for item B, that was simply 1. We only have 1 here per bundle here for item. For item B here, that was 1 per bundle. Item A, we had 3 per bundle, so that gave us 12,000 units here of A. For item B, we had 4,000 or 4,000 here for item B, just going through that. Totaling them together, we're going to have 16,000 here. So that's between, for both A and B, that's for our break-even point. Just to understand how these bundles work here. That's all I wanted to point out here. So 4,000 bundles, you just take 3 times 4,000 here. For A, the sales ratio here of A was 3 here. That gave you the 12,000. And then for B, the sales ratio here was 1 here. So 1 times 4,000 bundles gave you 4,000 here for B. Just understand that. Total amount here is 16,000. Okay, so now we've figured that out here. Now let's go and look at our break-even point in revenues here for these multiple products here, and just go through some equations here before we move on to going through a graph here. So I've got this laid out here again just so we understand. That's our operating income equation that we had up above here. So let's look at just go through our equations here and understand how we figure these out. So our contribution margin as a percentage, that's simply taking the contribution margin here of the bundle that we figured out here to be $3 here. That was the 3 quantity of A here of 3 times 60 cents here per unit plus 1 here, 1 of B times $1.20 per unit. That gave us what? That was $3 here for a contribution margin here per bundle. Okay, and then you divide, as the percentage here, you take that contribution margin per bundle here, $3, and divide it by your revenue here per bundle. And let's look at that here. For the $6, that was simply taking a 3 here of product A times the $2 here for $6. And then for item B here, that was simply one item here of B times $3. So total amount here is $9. Divide that into revenue per bundle here for A and B. Divide it into the $3 contribution per bundle, you get 33%. Okay, so simple enough. Now let's look at our break-even revenues here. So this is the revenues that we have to generate here to break even. And that's just taking our fixed cost. We can look at it in terms of our fixed cost here. That was that 12,000 here in our fixed cost. And divide it by that contribution margin percentage per bundle that we just calculated here at 33%. That's going to give us $36,000 here. So that we have to generate those $36,000 here in revenues before we break even here. Okay, now we can go down to the number of bundles that are required to be sold here to break even. So that's what we really calculated up above before here, those 4,000 bundles. And you can do it in these terms. You take your break-even revenues. Remember, we calculated those to be 36,000. Divide them by the revenues on a per bundle here. That's your total revenues per bundle. And remember, we calculate that here for $6 plus $3 to be $9. So dividing your 36,000 here by $9 here, the total revenues per bundle here, our break-even revenue divided by the revenues per bundle, you're going to get 4,000 here. So that's the bundles or the grouping here that we have to sell between A and B here. 4,000. Remember, we determined A would have had to, because of that ratio here, we would have had to sold 12,000 of A here, and that was the ratio 3 here, and for the ratio here 1B, that was 4,000. Total amount of 16,000. But these are just in terms of the bundles here, 4,000. Okay, now we can also look at our variable cost here as a percent of revenues. And remember, if we went back up to our equation here on our costing for A here, we had 3 of A times the cost here was $1.40 plus 1 of B here times variable cost of $1.80. So grouping, just summing those amounts, our variable cost here is $6, and our revenues here divided by our revenues that we calculate, revenue for the bundle here of $9. $6 here was the variable cost for the bundle. $9 here is the revenues, or the selling price that total selling price times those quantities we calculated. That's going to give us 66%. Okay, and then our contribution margin as a percentage, simply our revenues, we're looking at that as our base amount, as our 100% here, subtract out our variable cost here on a percent of our revenues of 66%. That's going to give us our contribution margin as a percentage here based on our revenues here of 33%. Simply revenues of 100% minus our variable cost here of 66% gives us our contribution margin as a percentage here of 33%. We also calculated that up above here to be 33%, but just going through it in different fashion. Okay, so now we've went through, determined our quantities here and our break-even revenues and that. Let's go up and let's apply it to a graph here. Okay, so we're going to look at our cost, volume, profit graph here, and we're going to look at the bundle products here between A plus B. So before we get into our graph, let's just review that sales ratio here. Again, A, we're planning to sell 30,000 here of item A, 10,000 here of item B. Sales ratio here of 3 to 1. And that equates to our bundles here, because now each bundle again includes 3 of A and 1 item of B here. Total amount here 4. So the 30,000 here is really 10,000 bundles, just so you understand that. Total of 40,000 items here divided by total amount here of 4 between the 2 items we're selling gives us 10,000 bundles. Okay, so we understand that. Okay, so now let's go down and let's look at our cost, volume, profit graph here. And I've got it laid out here on our x-axis. I'm going to show our bundles sold in terms of thousands of bundles here. And then along our y-axis, these are dollars here in terms of thousands of dollars here. And what we're going to, those are our dollar amounts here on the y-axis. Bundles sold here on our x-axis. And what we have to determine here is we're going to have in brown here, I'm going to show the revenue line here. On a per bundle basis, we're going to have to calculate how much revenue on a per bundle basis that we're going to be generating here. And then also our cost line. I'm showing the cost line in green here. That's really our variable cost on a per bundle basis that we're going to calculate. And along with that here, we're going to have that break-even point here of 12,000. So our variable cost line here, green line, isn't going to start until we've got our dollar amount here at 12,000. And then these 2 lines here are going to intersect at some point. That's going to be their break-even point. And anything before that is really a loss that we're generating here in terms of our revenues here, cost versus our revenues. And anything beyond that's going to be a profit. And the difference here between our revenues that we're going to have and our cost line here, that's going to be our contribution margin. Okay, so let's go and let's figure out, just a neat way of figuring out those revenues and costs on a per bundle basis. So this is the case here where I've just taken that operating income equation here and separated out between our sales price and our variable cost, and between product A here and product B, just looking at the total amounts here to determine our revenues and costs and our contribution margin. Again, our bundled, we're looking at the bundles here with sales ratio of 3:1 that we have. So for product A, just say our selling price here, that was $2 times that, the ratio here of 3 per bundle here. Subtract out our variable cost of $1.40 times 3 per bundle here. So the difference here gives us that contribution margin here of 60 cents. $2 minus $1.40 is going to give us the contribution of 60 cents here per unit we sell times the quantity of 3 here. And then product B, we had the selling price of $3 here, only one item here, or one item here of product B that we're selling per bundle, or here, plus variable cost here, $1.80, one again here. Subtract $1.80 from the selling price here of $3, you're going to get a contribution margin here of $1.20 here per bundle. Okay, so you can just cross multiply or add across here just to get our total revenues. $2 times 3, that would be $6 plus $3 times 1. That's going to give us total here $3 plus $9 in revenue. So that's going to be our revenue line here, $9 per bundle here. So for each bundle we sell of A and B here, we're going to generate revenues here of $9. Okay, and then for our costs, simply we can go across here in the line here, $1.40 times 3. What is that? I don't know. $4.20 here plus $1.80 times 1. $4.20 plus $1.80 gives us $6 here cost here per bundle. And then we could do the same thing across here for the contribution margin. 60 cents times 3 plus $1.20 here times 1 is going to give us $3 here in contribution per bundle. But we could have just gone in, since we calculated everything out here, I'm just showing how you do the arithmetic here to determine your revenues, your costs, and your contribution margin. We could have just taken those revenues here, subtract out less our cost, is going to give us $9 here less $6 is going to give us a contribution here of $3. Okay, so now we've got our revenue here line set up here, and that starts out at 0 here based on our bundle sold. For each bundle we sell, we're going to generate a revenue here of $9 per bundle, and we equate that here to 100% when we look at them in comparison to our costing and our contribution margin. And then for our cost, we calculated, well, the $9 here come off our calculations here, $9 for our revenue here, and then our cost is coming out of here at $6. So $6 here per bundle, where that's our variable cost that we're having to pay here on a per bundle basis here. And again, that's $6 over $9 is going to be 66% here goes towards our cost. And then our contribution margin is just simply what we calculate, $3 here per bundle here, and that ratio here is 33%, $3 divided by $9 bundle here. Okay, so now we can go in and we can determine, we're going to be working on, well, maybe what we should start with first here is that break-even point, and then we'll move up to the point here where we're having those 10,000 bundles are sold, and we'll work off our graph here just to get the basics to understand what's going on here. So starting with our break-even point here, well, we determine that to be 4,000 bundles that we have to sell. The grouping here of A and B, and we can look at that. We determine our break-even point. That was simply our fixed cost here of 12,000 divided by our contribution per bundle here of $3. That would give us our break-even point here, $4,000. I'm just tying these formulas into our graph to understand what's going on here. And then looking at our break even in revenues, that's going to be based on those 4,000 bundles that are sold here at the break even point. We're going to generate revenues here at 36,000 that we calculated. Simply that was our fixed cost here at 12,000. We can look at it in those terms divided by the contribution percentage per bundle. That was that 33%. So that would give us the 36,000. And then we can look at these break-even point here in terms of the number of bundles that have to be sold that we calculated. So that was that break-even in revenues here, 36,000, divided by the revenues per bundle. And at that point here, again, our revenues per bundle is $9 per bundle and all the way up the line. So 36,000 here in our break-even revenues that we have, divided by $9 per bundle, again gives us 4,000 here in break-even point. Just going over our equation here and tying it into our graph. So looking at that 4,000 here as bundles that are sold, and everything is in thousands here, moving up to our line where they intersect, where the revenue and our cost line intersect here, moving across, we got 36,000 here in break-even revenues. But that's the case here, just tying it into our graph, the 36,000 that we calculated. And then we'd have to, just so you understand where that break-even point comes from, we'd have to subtract 24,000 here in our cost. Our costing here was $6 per bundle here, times 4,000 bundles, is going to give us 24,000. We have to subtract out our cost from our break-even revenues here, 36,000, and then we also have to subtract out our variable cost here of 12,000. So you can see this is where we get down to a break-even point here of $0 here, break-even point. 36,000 coming off our revenues here, our revenue line, $9 here times 4,000, 24,000 coming off, $6 per bundle here, our cost times 4,000, and then just the fixed cost here of 12,000. Netting those out, zero amount, come up with a zero break-even point. Just to understand how that works off our graph. Now let's move over to this 10,000 here. Those are the bundles that are sold here. Now remember the 10,000 here, that included 30,000 of A and 10,000 of B. Total amount here, 40,000 units we sold, but we're looking at it in terms of bundles sold. That's why we're doing this whole problem here based on those bundles sold for these, grouping those multiple products together here. Okay, so there's a number of ways here we can determine our revenues or our profits, and we'll just go through them here. So let's just start out here with the first deal here. So we got our contribution margin per unit here, $3 per bundle. We take it times the 10,000 bundles we're selling, again times $3. That's going to give us 30,000 here in contribution here. That would be the amount here between what it turns out is to be at 10,000 bundles here. That times $9 per bundle, that's going to be 90,000 here in cash or dollars we're looking at. But then our cost, we take in $6 per bundle times 10,000 bundles here. That would be 60,000 here in cost, and 90,000 less of our revenues here, less 60,000 in our cost, gives us the 30,000 here. But now we have to subtract out our fixed cost here, 12,000. So 12,000 here from the 30,000 based on our contribution here for those bundles is going to give us an income here of 18,000. Okay, so that's just the first easy way of looking at it. Now we can also go back and we can look at it in terms of A and B here, and based on that contribution margin here per unit. For A we had 60 cents here contribution margin per unit times the 10,000 bundles here, and we have 3 of A here for every bundle we're selling. So 3 times 10,000, what, 30,000 times 60 cents here per unit gives us 18,000 here for A. And then B, again, same thing. There's one unit of B here for each 10,000 bundles we're selling. So 10,000 times 1 times the contribution margin was what, $1.20 here per bundle for, well, $1.20 here for B. That gives us 12,000 here. So we'd have to subtract out our fixed cost, and just happens to be our fixed cost here was that 12,000 from our net amount up here. What would that be? 18. Well, that would have been what, 30,000 up here, less the fixed cost of 12,000. It gives us an income of 18,000. Same as we measured, we calculated up above. Just went through it here based on our sales ratio here between A and B, and how many of A and B were included in each of those bundles based on their contribution margin on a unit basis here for A and B. Okay, so we've calculated it that way. Now we have one other way we can look at it here. We can look at our equation here, our line equation here, at Y, our dollars here, equals mx plus b. M is the slope here of those lines, and x again would be quantity of our bundles sold, and b really represents our intersection here, our fixed cost here on our y-axis. So we could calculate our income just by looking at our slopes here. So let's just go down and look at that. Okay, so our income using our line equation. So y and m, better go back here. M is really, let's go back to our line here. M is really the slope of the line here. And what we mean by the slope, that's the change of y over the change of x. So change of x here would be one bundle. Change of y here is $9 for our revenue here, because we're selling, we're having revenues of $9 for each bundle sold. And then our cost, the slope of the line here, is $6. That is, our costs here, our variable costs, are $6 here for every bundle that's sold. Okay, so just now we can go down and just look at our income using our line equation here. Y equals mx plus b. Well, b is actually, in this case, subtracting out our fixed cost. So m is really the difference between our slopes. We had a slope here of 9 for our revenues, less 6 here for our costs. So that's going to give us $3 here. That's really our contribution margin here. That's the slope here, our contribution margin, times 10,000 units that we're selling here, less 12,000 in fixed cost over here. So that net amount is going to give us 18,000 here. Same as we calculated up above. And you can use any of these methods here to determine your revenue or your income here. But just giving it here, so you can use your line equation here, knowing your slopes to each of the your contribution margin here for each of the units, or for the between your the contribution margin, that is your revenues less your cost, and also knowing your fixed cost. So you can just plug it into that equation, or you can do it on determine your income here based on the contribution margin per bundle here times the number of bundles you're selling here, 10,000, or you could do it on a per unit basis here, knowing the number of bundles, take the ratio here that you have for each, that you're selling for your sales ratio here, or your sales mix for each bundle, and then you can determine, subtract it on your fixed cost, you can determine your income. Okay, so really I just went through this graph here, and it's really looking at it in terms of bundles sold. And what we talk about bundles sold, again, is just the grouping of A and B. It's easier to look at it in these terms here rather than just looking at A and B separately on cost, volume, profit graphs. Here you can look at it and get a pretty good idea what's going on here, looking at any dollars and costs that you're generating. And then you get, again, you can look at it where you got those two different lines here. You have to determine the slope for your revenue line here and your costing line, and then you can see where they intersect. You can go through all your formulas, but again, this is pretty handy little item here, just graphing it out here on a cost, volume, profit graph here in terms of our bundles sold. And then one other thing, and we'll get into this at another video or something, it's really the sales mix here is really a key here between your revenues and your costs here. So what we're saying here is that, say for example here, all of a sudden you don't meet your requirements here in product B. You really have pretty low requirements here. You're only selling 1 unit here of product B for every 3 units here of product A. Now you can see product A here is generating a much low, only 50% here, a contribution margin here based on product B here. So the ideal, what you want to really do is you want to be able to sell more of product B and less of product A. That is, increase your ratio here. Let's just go up to it. Instead of selling 3 of A and 1 of B, you might want to sell 2 of B and whatever it works out here for A. You would want to sell less of A, greater of B here, where you have the greater contribution. Therefore, you're going to get a bigger change here between your in your contribution margin. So we're going to look at that later here. But the sales mix is really critical when you're looking at these grouped or these bundle groups here. Okay, so that'll pretty much cover it here, and we'll get into sales mix and how it affects the income here later here. But that's just going over it here. We just looked at basically the different ways we could determine. We had to determine our break-even points here. We went through them using the equations here, and we also went through them with our graphs here. I guess I went through all the numbers. Maybe one thing other here. Maybe this number I missed here. That was that income equation here, or at $18,000 here in income we generated. Simply taking, okay, let's look at it on our graph here. We figured it out for our break-even point here, but let's look at the numbers here for our income here. Okay, so we had 10,000 here bundles that we sold, moving up to our revenue lines here, $9 here per bundle times 10,000 here gives us 90,000 here in revenue. And then our costing, so that was 90,000 here. Now our costing, we had those 10,000 bundles times $6 per bundle here for costing. So that's going to give us 60,000 here in dollars here on our costing. So we'd subtract that here from the 90,000. And then we also have that fixed cost we have to cover, that 12,000 here in fixed costs. So grouping our 90,000 here less our revenues that we generated here based on 10,000 bundles sold, less our costing here of 60,000 based on those 10,000 bundles sold. And then we'd have to, again, subtracting out our fixed costs, we're going to come up with an income here of $18,000. That's just looking at it on the graph. Now we calculated it in all these other ways here, 18,000 in income, but just looking at it here on the graph. Okay, so that'll pretty much summarize it here. Just remember, when you're dealing with these multiple products here, you have to determine what your sales ratio here for any bundled, whatever the sales ratio here is between the different products. In this case, we had only 2 products, product A, product B. But you get any number of products, you'd have to go through the same procedure here to determine their sales ratio. So if you had 3 different products, you'd have a ratio here of so much for product A, so much for product B, so much for product C, and so on. And then you'd have to figure out your numbers based on that sales ratio here. So knowing your sales ratio, your selling price, you can determine the total revenues that you're generating here on a per bundle basis or a per group basis. You can determine your total variable costs here on a per bundle basis, and then you can easily, and then from difference here really gives you your contribution margin here on a per bundle basis. Okay, so that'll pretty much summarize what we're talking about here when we're talking about bundled or group products here and having to determine their costing, the revenues here, and break-even points. Okay, so that'll summarize our topic.